Salutations, Glitch Bottle patrons. Your wish is my command. In the last Patreon poll, you voted to do a deep dive into one of the conjurations of the Solomonic grimoiric traditional system. And I thought, why not just do one? Why not do 7? And so that's why, for this specific poll in this video, we are going in depth into the planetary conjurations of the day that are found in the very well-known grimoire, first printed in 1559, but with manuscripts before that, the Heptameron of pseudo Peter de Abano. And so I not only have myself, but we may have some special guests who are also sharing their expertise about how to actually use these powerful conjurations. So one of the questions that I get from listeners and podcast patrons with some regularity is, what is a consistent way that I can engage with and deepen my relationships with planetary spirits in a traditional Solomonic system? And to me, one of the most powerful but also oldest grimoiric traditions, if you will, is using the conjuration of the day. There are 7 conjurations for each day of the week found in the Heptameron, and so in this video, we are going to be exploring and taking a deep dive into 3 main areas. A brief overview of planetary magic in the grimoiric system, a very brief overview. Also, delving into the history and what exactly are the conjurations of the day, and then also, practically, how can you use these conjurations? So those 3 areas. Let's kick things off. But before we do, I hear people say this occasionally, but if you have not subscribed to the Glitch Bottle channel, please make sure to do so. Hit, slam, conjure, put into a triangle and interrogate the subscribe button, whatever you feel you need to do. And definitely hit that like button. I don't know why I feel like I need to say this, because I see other people say this, but regardless, thank you so much for checking out the videos. Okay, so when it comes to the planetary conjurations, let's start with, what the heck does planetary organization, planetary magic actually mean? And this is a huge topic, and it can branch off into so many different and fascinating directions. But I feel that getting a basic sense of how planetary magic is at least structured in some of the grimoires is super helpful. So going back hundreds and hundreds of years, many spirits found in the grimoires or the handbooks of magic that you see in the Solomonic tradition have a planetary structure or layout or an architecture. And what this means is that each day of the week in some grimoires, and we see this going to other grimoires, is governed by a specific spirit. Specifically an angel who is associated with a specific planet of each day of the week, and each planet is associated with 1 or 2 zodiacal signs. And so if this all sounds super confusing, it was definitely confusing to me at first as well. And so here is a chart that I found very helpful when I first began studying magic, from the 1801 Handbook of Occult and Ceremonial Magic, The Magus by Francis Barrett. It's also known as the Celestial Intelligencer, which I just love. And I'll link to this image below if you're not watching the video and you want to pull it up as you listen. But this is just a wonderful image that lays out the planetary structure in the grimoires. And again, this is one way to lay this out, because we know that the names of angels and their associations can change, and there are other planetary intelligences, but also planetary spirits in other grimoires that we're not touching on here. So I feel this is just a very helpful way of understanding the layouts that you'll see in grimoires like the Heptameron, or also the Proto-Heptameron as well, the Elucidarium Necromantiae. And so, for example, in this chart, we can see that Friday is governed by the angelic spirit Anael, or Haniel, who has a specific angelic seal, or an angelic sigil, that's to be inscribed and used in the ritual. And Anael rules the planet Venus, and the planet Venus rules 2 zodiac signs, Taurus and Libra. And also, all of this Friday Venusian activity takes place in the third heaven, which has the name of Sagun. And so the organization of the heavens, this is a very ancient structure. Obviously, what I laid out is not the only structure, and it's very complicated and fascinating. And this organization is effectively a structure that was visualized in earlier times as composed of enclosed spheres, where if you're standing on Earth looking upwards, the first heaven closest to us, the first heaven, quote unquote, is associated with the moon. The second heaven upwards, beyond that, is Mercury. The third in one of the spheres is Venus. And since we're on Earth, the fourth heaven is associated with the sun. The fifth heaven is associated with Mars. The sixth is associated with Jupiter. And the seventh heaven is associated with the planet Saturn. And I remember hearing somewhere that when someone says, oh, she's so happy, she's on seventh heaven, or I'm on seventh heaven, that in a way, that's actually a veiled reference to this structure, because just like Saturn and the seventh heaven was an ancient boundary of the known universe, just so your extreme state of joy in life, for example, has placed you on the extreme boundaries of ecstasy, or the seventh heaven. So that was just something that I heard. Let me know in the comments if you've seen the same thing as well. So this organization, this kind of 7 days, 7 planets, 7 angels and spirits and sigils associated, this is a very, I would consider, rough overall sketch on how grimoires like the Heptameron lay out the planetary organization, because each day has a planet, an angel, a sigil, a planet that rules over zodiacal signs, and it's all associated within a heaven where it operates. This leads us to part 2, the structure and history of the conjurations of the day. All right, so given all of this complexity, and given the fact that we have days and planets and angels and more, this is where the planetary conjurations of the day, as found in the Heptameron, come in, because they're such a powerful way to conjure the planetary spirits ruling on that day for virtually any magical purpose, because they can be used outside of a full, formal, ceremonial, magical ritual. And these conjurations, in the form that we see and use them today, are about 700 years old. And as to history, yes, these conjurations are, of course, found in the Heptameron, the Elucidation of Necromancy, Elucidarium Necromantiae, manuscripts from the 1500s, but they're also found in the 1450s Necromantic Munich Manual manuscript, also known as CLM 849, and that was touched on in the excellent book Forbidden Rites by Dr. Richard Kickheffer. But even before that, a really big thanks, as always, to the great Joseph H. Peterson for pointing out to me that versions of these conjurations are also found in the book of Raziel, or the Liber Razialis, as recorded in the mid-14th century, so mid-1300s, in MS Reglat 1300 is the name of that manuscript. So given this fascinating 700-year-old history, I think it would be super helpful to see what these planetary conjurations look like and also how they're structured. And so if you have a copy of Joseph H. Peterson's Elucidation of Necromancy book, which I am now going to impromptu search for and show you, it is the Elucidation of Necromancy. It's a great book. I would definitely encourage that you pick up a copy. Or if you visit Joseph H. Peterson's Heptameron page on esotericarchives.com, which I will link to below, you will see all 7 conjurations of the day laid out. And so why don't we pick one of the 7 to work with? And I picked the conjuration of Sunday involving Michael or Michael and the planet Sol, or the sun. And I remember years ago when I was memorizing these conjurations, I noticed that each conjuration is roughly divided into 3 sections. There's the first section, the God name section. Then the middle part, which is the overseer section. And finally, there's the third and final, the target spirit section. So I think it might be useful just to break down these three different sections of the planetary conjurations. And so in this first section, this God name section, this opens each conjuration of the day, and it's where the magician addresses the target spirit, in this case, Michael, the angel governing the sun and Sunday, and the operator invokes or calls the angel by reciting the divine names of God and commemorations of God's power to impress upon the angel that the very power of God moves them to listen to the magician. And I think that these names as combinations to a safe, if you will, where by reciting these specific names in a specific order, and all of the divine names are different in the names and the order for each of the 7 conjurations, this unlocks, or it allows, or opens up, or facilitates, if you will, the successful exchange between the magician and the angelic beings. So in this specific case, as you can see, in the first part of the Conjuration of Sunday, the God name section, we have, I conjure and confirm upon you, ye strong and holy angels of God, in the name Adonai, Ehyeh, Ehyeh, which is he who was, and is to come. Ehyeh, Abraye, and in the name Shaddai, Kadosh, 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 sitting on high upon the cherubim, and by the great name of God himself, strong and powerful, who is exalted above all heavens, Ayeh, Sarayeh, maker of the world, who created the world, the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is in the first day, and sealed them with his holy name, Fa. So this first section is incredibly powerful, activating these nomina magica, these God names. But that's only the first part of every conjuration of every day of the week, because you're not done there for Sunday, because you, as the magician, you aren't only conjuring or involving the angel of the day by the names of God and commemorating God's power, although that is in the Consecratio Dei step, this first step of Solomonic magic, that is definitely a very logical place, the most logical place that one might start with. But you now move on to invoking the angels and spirits who are found in the fourth heaven, the heaven of the sun. And also in each of the 7 conjurations of the day in the Heptameron, you name a special angel, but the earlier title is an overseer spirit. And this spirit rules the angels of the fourth heaven. And so this opens up an entire future video about the overseers that I'd love to do. And there's a lot more depth to go into, but I would love to give kind of the broad strokes about the overseers found in the 7 conjurations. All right, these overseers are powerful spirits who sit on 7 sublunar thrones, and those 7 sublunar thrones are placed in 7 encampments under the first heaven, the heaven closest to us, so the lunar heaven. And they command, these 7 overseers in their 7 encampments, command the angels and spirits under them to do the will of the magician. So their history goes back at least 1,800 years, as found in the Hebrew Sefer HaRazim. Yes, this is another book of Raziel, and here is part of the introduction that I'd like to read you about the overseers from the Sefer HaRazim, this 1,800-year-old text, and here translated by Michael A. Morgan, which I think this adds very rich context to exactly what we're calling upon in the Heptameron. And it reads like this. The name of the first firmament is called Shamayim. Within it are encampments filled with wrath, and 7 thrones are prepared. there, and upon them are seated overseers, and around them on all sides encampments of angels are stationed and are obedient to men at the time when they practice magic, to everyone who has learned to stand and pour libations to their names, and cite them by their signs at the period when prayer is heard, so as to make a magical rite succeed. Over all these encampments of angels, these 7 overseers rule, to dispatch them for every sort of business, so that they will hasten and bring success. These are the names of the 7 overseers who sit upon the 7 thrones. The name of the first is Orphaniel, and this gives the Hebrew letters, and I'm adding the heptameron names. The name of the second is Tetra or Tegra. The name of the third is Dagiel. And the name of the fourth is Kalamia or Salamia. The name of the fifth is Ahimoy. The name of the sixth is Pastor. And the name of the seventh is Boel. And all of them were created from fire, and their appearance is like fire, and their fire is blazing, for from fire they emerged. And without permission, the angels who serve them do not go out to engage in magical actions. They wait until a command comes to them from one of the 7 overseers, the occupants of the 7 thrones who rule over them, for they are subject to the will of the overseers and go about only with their permission. So this is absolutely fascinating because it adds an amazing context that in the heptameron conjurations of the day, you have reference to, aside from the divine names of God like Adonai, Shaddai, etc., probably one of the earliest sources that we have for spirits and spirit names in the almost 2,000-year-old Sefer HaRazim. And so these overseers and their heavens and the overseer names, they're also found 1,000 years later in the grimoires, in the 900s, in the 1100s, 1200s, 1300s. Again, we see these kind of fingerprints taking place. And Joseph H. Peterson, again, the wonderful Joseph H. Peterson, shares on esotericarchives.com this fascinating continuity, because you can see, and I'll put it up on the screen as well, the names of these same 7 overseers with slightly different names, and also the heavens and the different manuscripts from the Heptameron, the Munich Manual, CLM 849, and Liber Razialis. So these angels of whichever heaven that we're calling upon, right? So if you are engaging and reciting a conjuration of the day, one of the 7 from the Heptameron, whatever angel that you're calling upon, it is the angels and also the overseer of that heaven in this middle section. These are powerful forces that you're invoking, and they're vital to the conjuration of the day in the Heptameron. And so there's also, to me, just a side observation, and I've chatted with a wonderful magician, Ted, as well, who's noticed this. There's also something almost jinnic or fire-breathed in these overseers. And I'm not saying that they are definitely not angelic beings, even though the Heptameron uses the word angels, but there's something powerful and mysterious about these 7 overseers. Also, as a quick aside, even the language, this is so cool to me, just to nerd out here, the language from 1,800 years ago in the Sefer HaRazim is very close to the language we find in the Heptameron. So, for example, you say in the Sefer HaRazim, right, I adjure you in the name of the angels of the 4th encampment who serve Kalimoy or Salamia. And in the Heptameron it says, by the name of the holy angels who rule in the 4th heaven and serve before the most mighty Salamia. I mean, this is an incredible continuity there, or similarity. And so the overseers are really the main part of the second chunk of the 3-chunk conjuration of the day structure. And so now that we understand a little more about this middle section of our conjuration of the day, let's see it in action, where in our Heptameron Sunday example, we sum up all of the divine names previously used, the encampment angels, the planet, and the overseer angels, when we say, quote, "And by the name of the holy angels who rule in the fourth heaven and serve before the most mighty Salamia, an angel great and honorable, and by the name of his star, which is soul, and by his sign, and by the immense name of the living God, and by all the names aforesaid." Well, we'll get to that in the third part, but that is the middle section. So really accentuating that overseer, and again, going back almost 2,000 years in history, bringing that to the modern day. So the first section of every conjuration is the god names, broadly speaking. The second section is naming the planet and the overseer. Now we arrive at the third and final section, which is the target spirit section. So we've, at this point, with these two sections that we have recited, we've impressed upon the archangel Michael both the divine names that we're using and also the names of the overseer and their angels in the fourth heaven or encampment. And we're now ready to bring the full weight of this invocation upon Michael himself. And we do this by moving to the third and final aspect of the conjuration of the day, by naming the target spirit here, which is Michael, and also in the Heptameron and the Lucidarium, there are other spirits with Michael. So for Sunday, this would be, say, Michael and Dardiel and Hurapatel, who are the ministers along with Michael or Michael. And so you name the spirit Michael and you commemorate which day of the week that Michael rules. So this third kind of culminating section says, okay, after we've recited the divine names, after we've recited the overseer and the planet, we say, "I conjure thee, Michael, O great angel, who art chief ruler of the Lord's day, and by the name Adonai, the God of Israel, who hath created the world and all that therein is, that thou labor for me, and fulfill all my petitions according to my will and desire in my cause and business." Now, there's a couple of important things to point out here. So this is the last and final section of the conjuration of the day. And it's important because, as Dr. Richard Kickheffer says on page 179 of Forbidden Rites, that when it comes to the conjurations of the day, quote, "their purpose is left unspecified, there being no explicit instruction to the spirits conjured." This is a really key point because it means that you, as the magician, as the operator, you have an open, breathable space where you can ask the angel and ministers of the day for specific requests or needs, not within the context of a full Heptameron ritual, for example. So in the Heptameron at this point, if you were doing a full Heptameron ritual, you would basically ask the angels and ministers in this conjuration of the day to lend the full weight of their office to successfully evoke the aerial king and ministers of that day of the week. But in a general sense, by calling upon the angel and the ministers of the day, your request can actually be much more fluid and available to other needs. So this could be requests for blessings, it could be protection, or other magical requests, which of course vary greatly. So that is the conjuration of the day. And when it comes to when to recite this, in our example, definitely Sunday, but also you hear often in grimoire magic the day and the hour. And what that means is, for Sunday, for example, there are 24 hours in a day, and this conjuration on the day and hour would be recited on the 1st hour, the 8th hour, the 15th hour, or the 22nd hour in a 24-hour period. And if you're looking to contact Michael and his ministers, this would be considered a very strong timing way to engage with the conjuration of the day. An easy way to remember this is that the 1st hour of every single day is the moment of sunrise. And depending on the time of the year, it could be later or earlier when you're reciting the conjuration. Also, if you're looking for an excellent video on planetary magic, I definitely will link below to Foolish Fish, who has a great timing video as well. And when it comes to the conjuration of the day, you might be wondering, okay, every conjuration has 3 parts. The request in the conjuration is open-ended, so I can use that for many different things. But how do actual practicing esotericists use the conjuration of the day? Well, at the end of this video, I'm going to share 3 tips, 3 glitch bottle tips, if you will, for reciting the conjuration of the day. But first, I have asked a colleague and a practicing magician to share their thoughts on how they use these 7 conjurations. And so there's probably no better person to kick this off than Aaron Leitch, whose seminal Secrets of the Magical Grimoires tome was among the very first books that I ever read about Solomonic magic, and it's certainly one that I recommend to this day. And so I'll let Aaron Leitch take it away.
So how do I use the conjurations of the days of the week from the Heptameron? Well, first I should point out that the Heptameron was one of the primary source books John Dee was using when he received the Heptarchic system of magic. You might notice a similarity in the names. For instance, the 7 ensigns of creation in Dee's Heptarchia, which embody the 7 days of creation outlined in Genesis, are in fact the seals of, or you might say ensigns carried by, the 7 archangels listed in the Heptameron. So those archangels are an integral part of the hierarchy of Dee's Heptarchic royalty. That said, I have altars in my home dedicated to each of the 7 archangels listed in the Heptameron, and those altars include the 7 ensigns. In fact, the conjurations from the Heptameron each make a reference to a seal that embodies the planetary heaven as well as all of the angels within that heaven. And when I get to that part of the conjuration in my work, I'm directly referring to the ensign that is incorporated into that altar. Now, whenever you work an established altar like this, you don't just walk up to it, light a candle, and make a wish like they're storybook genies. You have to have a ritualized opening for that altar, which, depending on how you interpret it, either calls the entity to the altar or the entity is already there but asleep and you're waking it up. In either case, you're getting the entity's attention and letting it know there is work to be done. A great example of this is found in the African traditional religions. When you approach an Orisha or your Ganga or whatever entity you wish to work with, there are specific songs associated with each of them that you have to sing in order to wake the entity up and let it know there is work to do. In my work, I'm not usually attempting to summon the spirits, but instead addressing the archangel him or herself. I first light the candle on the altar with the Solomonic exorcism of fire, and then I light the coal for the incense with its exorcism and blessing. Then, after anointing myself and the icon of the archangel with oil sacred to that archangel, I continue to recite the appropriate conjuration of the day. From there, I'll proceed with whatever working I intend to do, but no matter what it is, it has to begin with that ritual opening in order to let the angel know there is work to be done. And while this is technically an extra Heptameron usage of these conjurations, I don't think it is at all removed from the context the author of the Heptameron intended. Even if I were going to perform the full Heptameron operation as it is presented in the grimoire, I would still begin the ritual exactly as described here.
And listeners, definitely check out the links below to support Aaron and Carrie Leitch with Doc Solomon's Occult Curios, their online shop, as well as their Patreon and YouTube channel. And now we move on to our second special guest sharing about the conjurations of the day, and that is Frater Ashen Chassan, ceremonial magician and author of Gateways Through Stone and Circle and Gateways Through Light and Shadow. Frater Chassan, take it away.
All right, excellent. Well, as far as the ways that I use the conjurations of the day, I should say that I really use them in a very sacred manner, but also a very mindful manner. Even though I use them often, just about every day, unless I'm away, they've become words and phrases that have become extremely sacred and potent for me because I've seen the effects of what happens when I say them. And it seems like the more that I recite them, the stronger they become. I also have altars to each of the 7 planetary archangels, as well as the 7 days. And it's also the areas where I consecrate and ask for the empowerment of the talismans, which are actually consecrated by the spirits and angels themselves. Not only are the archangels honored there, but also the angels of the planet listed in various grimoires, and of course within the Key of Solomon themselves, the ones that are listed usually in the first or third pinnacles of the surrounding kind of node sigils that help empower the rest of the talismans that actually are the beings that make them function as workable materia magica. So with each day, there's a few things that I do and have developed specifically in my practice is that at the end of each day, and if I can get out on the hour as well, I'll go into my magical chamber and I usually do prayers at the main altar, which is kind of like a church, resembles Catholic altar, which also has the 4 major archangels that most people within magical systems are familiar with. But then I'll go to the altar of the day and I light the candles, which also have oils and incenses associated with the planet and with the archangels themselves. Now, if I'm consecrating a talisman specifically, there's more that goes into it. But even after these pentacles are made and consecrated during their time and day, if they're not directly going off to clients, I will keep them on the altar and I'll do the conjuration of the day as a matter to ask and bring those powers, those angels, and those intelligences near and ask them to continue to bless and consecrate the pentacles and the articles that are on the altar. And besides candles and incense that are attributed to the planet and associated archangels, there's also other talismans, other articles that are there to empower and to bring in basically the forces, the energies, and the frequencies associated with that planet, with those correspondences that are actually found in the Heptameron. They describe what each of these planets can bring, how they can influence the life of human beings, and how to use them magically. So it's a really good, besides just learning conjuration and learning classical Solomonic evocation, there's a lot to learn through the correspondences and actually working with the powers of the days. And this is the way that I do it. A couple other things that I do is each altar has, like I said, candles and incenses associated with the angels, sometimes effigies or images as well. But I also have, on the main altar, I'll have a candle for the day, and I switch them out every day. And for me, this has really brought about many things, but also to honor the particulars of each day, the meanings that could be brought in of each day, so that there's never a horrible Monday or, days that you're rushing through just to get to the weekend or something. You're actually appreciating each day that you're alive, each day that you can work your will and do something specific associated with that day. I've really come to enjoy being mindful in that way. And so I'll switch out the candle on the main altar and light that, and I also put my hand over it. And then over the associated angel or picture, whatever I have, and simply say the archangel's name 3 times before I depart that altar. So the conjuration of the day is done, and other blessings and kind of personal prayers and rites that I've developed over time.
And definitely check out the links below to support Frater Chassan, his magical shop, and his other awesome work. And now, listeners, we move on to our third magician who is sharing how he uses the conjurations of the day, and that is ceremonial magician Adley Nichols. Adley, take it away.
How do I use the conjurations of the day? The short answer is I don't. Not in and of itself, anyway. It plays a very crucial role of nearly an opening of a full ritual. Not quite the opening, but near the beginning of an already established full ritual. We see kind of these pieces in the medieval era that are just the conjurations by themselves, all over the place. We see brief little rituals that in no way can be full, like the 4 rings. And that's because, as we see in Summa Sacra Magica 1346, we see that you take the conjuration and plug it into an already established work. So there is a format of doing a ritual that you follow, and then you plug it into that already established ritual. So in this case, the Conjuration of the Day is sort of a reduction of what we see more commonly in the era, which is seasonal. We see the seasonal angels, the names of the moon in the season, the earth in the season, the abyss in the season, the oceans in the season, the fire in the season, right? We see all of these things, and this is sort of a reduction version of that where it's reduced to just the day instead of the season. Very specific, so there's less names to call. So if you're working on something that is the day specific, where you don't want to get into all the nitty-ditty, other names, the Conjuration of the Day is a perfect way of doing it. It is the opening of a ritual, or near the opening of a ritual, where you establish the hierarchy, the celestial hierarchy that's going to empower the ritual for its further purpose. It's going to push it forward. You're going to gain the benediction, so to say, of the archangels, of the ministers of the day, of the overseers of the planets that's attributed to the day, of the angel of the hour, right? All those different things. You're going to just plug those names in, and by their names, you're going to hold authority as you go lower and lower and lower down that hierarchy. You can't skip the hierarchy in the historical context anyway. Now, you can take the ritual, you can plug it into different full rituals, like the Key of Solomon. If you wanted to plug it in there, that would work. Or if you wanted to plug it into, like the Elucidarium or Heptameron, they're already plugged in there. But in and of themselves, they're only a fraction of a ritual, and they're not intended to be the full spiel, right? So how I would use them, for example, if I was working on something that was specific to the day, a lot of my work is vigil work. I will light candles, and it still requires the fasting and the preparation. You still adorn the robe and the headdress and the belt and all this stuff that you have. And instead of a conjuration, as it's said, it is a prayer. And it accomplishes the same end. The only difference is you're not calling something in front of you to bind and blah, blah, blah. But instead, you're going through the same aspects. It's said a little different in the format of a prayer. And that is how you do it. And I simply light the candle as I recite these conjurations of all of these powerful names and all of these celestial spirits and then sublunar spirits and so on and so forth. It's a very long process for simply lighting a candle. But nonetheless, that is how I use the Conjuration of the Day. I don't take it out of its historical context. It fulfills a very important role, and that's how I use it.
And definitely, listeners, check out the links below to support Adley, his magical shop, and other services as well. And just a huge thanks to every single ceremonial magician sharing their amazing thoughts with the listeners today. Okay, so now that we've heard from an actual practicing, very well-informed Solomonic grimoire magician on how he uses the conjurations of the day, I'd like to close this video with 3 quick tips that I've also found effective in using these or other conjurations of the day. So, tip number 1 is don't just call the spirits themselves. You can also think about or consider calling other spirits or ask specific spirits to send other spirits that might be under their authority. So, for example, I was recently studying the grimoire from the 1300s, the Liber Iuratus, the Sworn Book of Honorius, and I came across this passage that is it's such an excellent catch-all to include and request to a spirit. And so the actual text itself says, and this is in a completely different context, but I'm going to give it to you anyways. It says, you name the spirit that you're conjuring, and then you say that you're not only conjuring that spirit, you say, et omnes alios spiritus animas daemones ventos qui vobis serviunt obediunt et subduntur. So you name the spirit in the Sworn Book of Honorius, but then you say, and also I conjure all other spirits, souls, demons, and winds, which serve, obey, and are placed under you. So in our Solar Sunday example with Michael, you could say something like, O angel of Sunday, Michael, I conjure you and all other spirits that are placed and serve under you. So this is just, I think, a very good way to broaden the spirits that you're speaking to, because many times in conjurations, you're effectively creating tributaries that attract other spirits. We see this in even the records historically, right? With John Dee and Edward Kelly, when they were performing angelic conjurations, oftentimes other spirits would show up, and those spirits would have to be tested to see if they were actually the spirit that they say that they were. So that might be something, is just to add in the target spirit and any other spirits that might serve under the target spirit. This brings us to tip number 2. Tip number 2 is memorization. So memorization is something that I think personally is so important to Solomonic magic. And it's not a flex. It's not something that is like, oh, wow, I have all this memorized. Memorization means nothing. And this is something that I know Frater, Ashen, Chassan, and others have talked about. Memorization means absolutely nothing unless you're actually going to sincerely use it and approach in a ritual. So memorization is so important for a few reasons. Number one, it makes things, by putting in a little more effort on the front end, your actual rituals are so much smoother because you're not worried about fumbling in the dim light, as Dr. Stephen Skinner says, and David Rankin in their book, The Goetia of Dr. Rudd. You're not kind of fumbling around in the half-dim light for a script that you're reading. So memorizing makes things more smooth, but here's another important thing. When you memorize something, like let's say you and I both memorize the same conjuration of the day from the Heptameron, the way we recite that conjuration and the way the conjuration emerges in these neuronic patternings and the way that the words are emphasized, the tone, the expression, the vocal modulations, all of these things are completely unique to you and to me. So by memorizing, it's not a cookie cutter thing that you're doing. You are reciting deep from the reservoir of your own consciousness, and you're putting yourself into the conjuration. So for me, memorizing is absolutely essential and really does help when it comes to the grimoire tradition. And so this brings us to tip number 3 when it comes to the conjurations of the day. And tip number 3 is start with one conjuration of the day. Yes, there are 7 conjurations, but don't say to yourself, well, I need to memorize all 7 conjurations, and then I need to build and outfit 7 altars for all 7 planets for all 7 days of the week, and then I can actually start recording results and engaging with spirits. I would definitely say just pick one. Don't worry about doing all 7. I mean, that's like when you hear occasionally, I really hope this is in jest, but you'll see people on forums say things like, I want to conjure all 72 spirits listed in the Lemegeton's Goetia. But chances are you are never, ever going to conjure all 72 spirits. I mean, as the great Jake Stratton Kent would say, may he rest in peace, this isn't a dark fluff bunny version of Pokemon. This is not catch them all. This is finding one day, one conjuration, maybe one aspect of a planetary office that you engage with, and pick that and start with that and build an altar from that as well. So those are my 3 tips. I hope you've enjoyed this video. As always, thank you to all of the amazing Glitch Bottle patrons who voted for this video on patreon.com/glitchbottle. And I cannot wait to chat with all of you soon. As always, this is Alexander Eth reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.